The morning fog hung thick over London as Camilla Parker Bowles sat in her private study, nervously checking her watch for the 10th time in 5 minutes. The heavy curtains were drawn shut, blocking out the gray November light that tried to seep through the palace windows. She had been planning this day for months, and now that it was finally here, her heart raced with both excitement and fear. On her mahogany desk lay a single airline ticket, hidden beneath a stack of official correspondence. The destination read Geneva, Switzerland, with a departure time of 2:30 p.m. from a small private airfield outside London. This was not an official royal engagement. This was not in any diary or schedule that the palace staff knew about. This was Camilla's secret escape plan, something she had been working on since the summer. The stress of royal life had been weighing heavily on her shoulders for months. The constant scrutiny from the press, the endless formal events, and the rigid protocols had become suffocating. She needed to get away, to breathe freely for just a few days, to be herself without cameras following her every move. Geneva offered the perfect solution, a quiet retreat where she could think clearly about her future. Her lady-in-waiting, Margaret, had been sworn to secrecy and was the only person who knew about the plan. Margaret had helped arrange everything through a network of discreet contacts. The private jet was booked under a false name, and the pilot was someone who specialized in confidential flights for wealthy clients who valued their privacy above everything else. Camilla had told everyone she would be spending the weekend at her country estate in Gloucestershire, a story that seemed perfectly believable since she often retreated there when she needed peace and quiet. The security team assigned to her had been given specific instructions to maintain a perimeter around the estate, but to give her space for private relaxation time. What they did not know was that Camilla had no intention of going to Gloucestershire at all. At exactly noon, she slipped out of the palace through a service entrance that was rarely monitored. She had studied the guard rotations for weeks and knew there was a 15-minute window when this particular door was unwatched. Dressed in simple civilian clothes, dark jeans, a plain sweater, and a baseball cap, she looked like any ordinary woman running errands in the city. A black sedan waited for her 3 blocks away from the palace. The driver, a middle-aged man named Thomas who worked for Margaret's cousin, did not ask any questions when she climbed into the back seat. He simply nodded and began driving toward the outskirts of London, following the route they had practiced twice before during dry runs. The drive to the private airfield took 45 minutes through winding country roads. Camilla watched the countryside roll by through tinted windows, feeling more relaxed with each mile that passed between her and the royal responsibilities she was leaving behind. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to walk through Geneva's streets without bodyguards, to sit in a cafe without anyone recognizing her, to simply exist as a normal person for a few precious days. The airfield appeared ahead, a small facility used primarily by wealthy business people who preferred to avoid the crowds and security checks of commercial airports. The jet was already waiting on the tarmac, its engines warming up for departure. It was a sleek white aircraft with no identifying marks except a registration number painted in small black letters near the tail. As the sedan pulled up to the departure building, Camilla felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. She was actually going through with this plan. After months of feeling trapped by royal protocol and public expectations, she was finally taking control of her own life, even if it was just for a weekend. The pilot, Captain Morrison, greeted her with professional courtesy. He was a man in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes who had clearly been briefed about the need for complete discretion. He assured her that the flight plan had been filed under routine business travel and that no one would question their departure or destination. Margaret had arranged everything perfectly. The passenger manifest listed Camilla under an assumed name, and all the paperwork appeared completely legitimate. The flight was scheduled to land at a private airfield outside Geneva, where a car would be waiting to take her to a small, exclusive hotel nestled in the Swiss mountains. As Camilla settled into the leather seat of the private jet, she felt lighter than she had in years. The engines grew louder and she could feel the aircraft preparing for takeoff. Through the small window, she watched the English countryside grow smaller below as they climbed into the afternoon sky. For the first hour of the flight, everything went exactly according to plan. The weather was clear, the flight was smooth, and Camilla allowed herself to relax completely for the first time in months. She read a novel she had been trying to finish for weeks, sipped tea from fine china, and imagined the peaceful days ahead of her in Switzerland. But unknown to Camilla, her carefully planned escape had already been discovered. Back at the palace, her absence had been noticed much sooner than expected. A routine security check had revealed that she was not at her Gloucestershire estate as she had claimed to be. The head of Royal Protection, Commander Harrison, had immediately launched a discreet investigation to determine her whereabouts. Commander Harrison was a veteran of the British military who had spent the last decade protecting members of the royal family. He was known for his attention to detail and his ability to anticipate potential security threats before they became serious problems. When Camilla's location could not be confirmed, every instinct told him that something was wrong. The investigation moved quickly and quietly. Within 2 hours, Harrison's team had traced Camilla's movements from the palace to the sedan pickup point and eventually to the private airfield. Security cameras at various locations along her route provided a clear picture of her planned escape. What worried Harrison most was not that Camilla had left without permission, but that she had done so without any security protection. As a senior member of the royal family, she was always supposed to have bodyguards nearby, even during private time. Her current situation represented a serious breach of protocol and potentially put her in danger. Harrison immediately contacted the Royal Air Force Command Center and requested that they track the private aircraft that had departed with Camilla on board. Military radar had been following the flight since takeoff, and they were able to provide real-time updates on the jet's position and heading. The decision to intercept the aircraft was not made lightly. Harrison consulted with senior palace officials and received authorization to take whatever steps were necessary to ensure Camilla's safe return to British soil. The official explanation would be that there had been a security concern that required her immediate return to London. 2 Royal Air Force fighter jets were scrambled from a base in eastern England with orders to intercept the private aircraft and escort it back to British airspace. The pilots were briefed on the sensitive nature of their mission and told that they were to use standard interception procedures to force the aircraft to return. Meanwhile, Camilla continued to enjoy her flight, completely unaware that her secret escape had been discovered and that military aircraft were already in pursuit. She was looking forward to landing in Geneva and beginning her brief taste of freedom from royal duties and public scrutiny. The first sign that something was wrong came when Captain Morrison received an urgent radio message from British Air Traffic Control. His face grew serious as he listened to the transmission, and Camilla noticed the change in his demeanor immediately. "Is everything all right, Captain?" she asked, setting down her teacup. Morrison hesitated before responding. "We're receiving some unusual radio traffic, ma'am. Nothing to worry about just yet, but I'm monitoring the situation closely." But even as he spoke those reassuring words, Morrison could see 2 fast-moving aircraft approaching from behind on his radar display. His years of flying experience told him exactly what was happening, even though he could hardly believe it. The Royal Air Force was coming to intercept their flight. Captain Morrison's hands tightened on the controls as the 2 RAF fighter jets appeared in his peripheral vision, their sleek gray forms cutting through the afternoon sky like deadly arrows. The radio crackled with an official voice that left no room for argument. "Private aircraft registration, GLXRY, this is Royal Air Force Squadron Leader Phillips. You are ordered to change course immediately and return to British airspace. Acknowledge this transmission." Camilla felt her stomach drop as she realized what was happening. Through the small aircraft window, she could clearly see the military jets flanking their plane, close enough that she could make out the RAF roundels painted on their wings. Her secret escape had been discovered, and now she was being hunted by her own country's Air Force. "Captain, what are our options?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead as he considered their situation. He had flown many confidential flights over the years, but he had never been intercepted by military aircraft. The RAF pilots were clearly serious about their orders, and Morrison knew that failure to comply could result in his pilot's license being revoked permanently. "Ma'am, I have to be honest with you," Morrison said, his voice strained with tension. "Those fighter jets can force us down if we don't cooperate. They have the authority to escort us back to Britain, and they won't hesitate to use that authority." But Camilla had not come this far just to give up without a fight. She had spent months planning this escape, and she was not ready to return to the suffocating world of royal protocol without at least trying to complete her journey to freedom. "Captain Morrison, I am giving you a direct order," she said with the authority that came naturally to her royal training. "Continue on our planned course to Geneva. I will take full responsibility for any consequences that result from this decision." Morrison found himself caught between his duty to obey his passenger and his responsibility as a pilot to ensure everyone's safety. The RAF jets were not going to simply disappear if he ignored them, and the situation was rapidly escalating beyond his control. The radio crackled again, this time with increased urgency. "Private Aircraft GLXRY, you have 30 seconds to acknowledge our instructions and begin your return to British airspace. Failure to comply will result in immediate escort procedures." Through the cockpit window, Morrison could see the lead fighter jet moving closer to their aircraft. The RAF pilot was using standard international signals to communicate that the private plane must follow his lead. There was no mistaking the seriousness of the situation. "Ma'am, please reconsider," Morrison pleaded with Camilla. "If we continue to resist, they have the authority to force us down at the nearest airport. We could end up landing somewhere much worse than back in Britain." But Camilla was experiencing something she had not felt in years, the thrill of rebellion against the system that controlled every aspect of her life. For once, she was making her own decisions without consulting palace advisors or worrying about public opinion. Even if her escape attempt failed, she wanted to push the situation as far as possible. "How much further to Swiss airspace?" she asked. Morrison checked his navigation instruments quickly. "About 40 minutes at our current speed, ma'am, but I don't think they're going to let us get that far." The fighter jets were now flying in tight formation around the private aircraft, one on each wing. The lead pilot was using hand signals to indicate that Morrison should follow him back toward Britain. The message was unmistakable, and the RAF had clearly been authorized to use whatever force was necessary to accomplish their mission. Inside the lead fighter jet, Squadron Leader Phillips was receiving updated orders from his command center. The situation had become a matter of national security, and he was authorized to take increasingly aggressive steps to ensure the private aircraft's return to British soil. "Control, this is Phillips. The target aircraft is not responding to our instructions and continues on its current heading toward Switzerland. Request permission to execute escort procedures immediately." The response came back within seconds. "Phillips, you are cleared to initiate escort procedures. Bring that aircraft home by any means necessary, but remember that you have a VIP passenger on board. Use minimal force and maintain safety protocols." Phillips acknowledged the order and signaled to his wingman to begin the escort maneuver. The two fighter jets moved into position to physically guide the private aircraft's path, using their superior speed and maneuverability to control where Morrison could fly. The technique was called herding, and it was a standard military procedure for dealing with uncooperative aircraft. The fighter jets would gradually alter their formation to make it impossible for the target plane to continue on its desired course, essentially boxing it in until the pilot had no choice but to comply with instructions. Morrison felt the turbulence as the fighter jets manipulated the air currents around his aircraft. The military pilots were skilled professionals who knew exactly how to use their plane's wake to influence the flight path of other aircraft without causing a collision. "Ma'am, they're forcing us to turn around," Morrison said to Camilla, fighting to maintain control as the RAF jets guided them into a wide banking turn back toward Britain. "I can't maintain our course to Geneva anymore. They're using our aircraft's aerodynamics against us." Camilla watched through the window as the Swiss Alps grew smaller in the distance, her dreams of freedom slipping away with each passing moment. She had been so close to escaping the golden cage of royal life, and now she was being dragged back against her will by the very system she had tried to escape. But even as defeat seemed certain, Camilla refused to give up completely. She asked Morrison if there were any alternative airports they could reach before being forced all the way back to Britain. "There's a small airfield in northern France," Morrison said, studying his charts desperately. "If we could somehow break away from these escorts, we might be able to reach it before they intercept us again." The idea was risky and probably futile, but it represented their last chance to salvage something from the escape attempt. Morrison would have to execute a sudden maneuver that would catch the RAF pilots off guard, giving them a brief window to change course before the fighter jets could react. "Do it," Camilla said without hesitation. Morrison took a deep breath and suddenly pushed the aircraft into a steep dive, hoping to slip beneath the fighter jet's formation and gain a few precious moments of freedom. The maneuver was dangerous and unexpected, and for a brief moment, it seemed like it might actually work. The private jet dropped rapidly through the sky, its engines straining as Morrison pushed the aircraft to its limits. Through the windows, Camilla could see the RAF fighters scrambling to match their new course, their pilots clearly surprised by the sudden evasive action. But the Royal Air Force pilots were among the best in the world, and they recovered from the surprise maneuver within seconds. The lead fighter jet rolled inverted and dove after the private aircraft, quickly regaining position alongside Morrison's plane. This time, Squadron Leader Phillips was not taking any chances. He moved his fighter jet directly in front of the private aircraft and began rocking his wings, the international signal for immediate compliance with escort orders. The message was clear: "Follow me now, or face the consequences." Morrison realized that further resistance was hopeless. The RAF pilots had demonstrated that they could match any maneuver he attempted, and continuing to fight would only put everyone's lives in danger. With heavy heart, he leveled off the aircraft and began following the fighter jets back toward British airspace. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said to Camilla. "They've outmaneuvered us. We have no choice but to return to Britain." Camilla slumped back in her leather seat, the weight of defeat settling over her like a heavy blanket. Her carefully planned escape had failed, and now she would have to face the consequences of her unauthorized flight. Palace officials would be furious, security protocols would be reviewed, and her chances of ever having real freedom again would be virtually eliminated. As the aircraft turned back toward England, Camilla could see storm clouds gathering on the horizon, as if the weather itself was reflecting her dark mood. Her brief taste of rebellion was over, and the golden cage of royal life was waiting to claim her once again. The landing at RAF Northolt was unlike anything Captain Morrison had ever experienced in his 25 years of flying. Military vehicles surrounded the runway as their aircraft touched down, their red and blue lights flashing in the late afternoon gloom. Security personnel in dark suits waited near the terminal building, their faces grim and professional as they prepared to take control of the situation. Camilla stared out the window at the reception committee that had been assembled to greet her return. She could see Commander Harrison standing near a black Range Rover, his military bearing unmistakable even at a distance. Next to him stood several other officials she recognized from palace security briefings, all of them looking decidedly unhappy about the day's events. As the aircraft engines wound down to silence, Morrison turned to face his passenger one final time. "Ma'am, I want you to know that it has been an honor flying with you today, regardless of how this situation has ended. I hope you won't face too severe consequences for what happened." Camilla managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Captain Morrison. You did everything you could to help me reach my destination. The fault lies entirely with my own planning, not with your skills as a pilot." The aircraft door opened with a soft hiss, and immediately 2 security officers appeared at the entrance. They were polite but firm, as they explained that Camilla would need to come with them immediately for a debriefing about the security breach that had occurred. Commander Harrison approached as Camilla descended the aircraft steps, his expression a mixture of relief and professional disappointment. "Ma'am, I'm very glad to see you safe and unharmed. However, I must inform you that this incident has created serious concerns about royal security protocols." "I understand, Commander," Camilla replied with as much dignity as she could manage. "I take full responsibility for my actions and any security risks that resulted from my decision to leave without proper authorization." The drive back to the palace was conducted in uncomfortable silence. Camilla sat in the back seat of the armored vehicle, watching the familiar London streets pass by through bulletproof glass. The freedom she had tasted for a few brief hours now seemed like a distant dream, and the reality of her situation was settling in with crushing weight. Palace officials had been working frantically during her absence to develop an official explanation for what had occurred. The story they had prepared was that Camilla had been called away on urgent family business and had taken a private flight that experienced technical difficulties, requiring an emergency escort back to British airspace. The press would never learn the true details of what had happened. The RAF pilots involved in the interception had been sworn to secrecy, and all records of the flight would be classified at the highest levels of government security. As far as the public would ever know, it had been a routine royal movement that encountered minor complications. But within the palace walls, the consequences of Camilla's escape attempt were severe and immediate. An emergency meeting was called with senior advisors, security officials, and other members of the royal household to discuss how such a breach of protocol could have occurred and what measures would be implemented to prevent future incidents. The meeting took place in a windowless conference room deep within the palace, away from any possible surveillance or eavesdropping. Commander Harrison presented a detailed timeline of events, explaining how Camilla had managed to evade security monitoring and reach the private airfield without detection. "The fundamental problem," Harrison explained to the assembled officials, "is that we trusted the subject to follow established protocols without implementing sufficient verification measures. She exploited our assumption that she would remain at her stated location." The head of palace administration, Sir Geoffrey Whitmore, was particularly concerned about the implications of the incident. "If word of this ever reaches the press, it could create a public relations disaster. The idea that senior royals can simply disappear without security oversight would undermine confidence in our entire protection system." Margaret, Camilla's lady-in-waiting who had helped plan the escape, was questioned extensively about her role in the incident. She admitted to helping arrange the flight, but insisted that she had believed it was for legitimate personal reasons rather than an attempt to evade royal responsibilities. "I thought she simply needed some private time away from official duties," Margaret explained tearfully. "I never imagined it would result in military aircraft being deployed or create such serious security concerns." The palace officials spent hours developing new protocols that would prevent similar incidents in the future. All royal movements would now require confirmation from multiple sources, and security teams would maintain more active monitoring of family members' locations rather than relying on their stated intentions. Camilla herself was required to attend a formal debriefing session where she was questioned about her motivations for attempting the unauthorized flight and her state of mind regarding her royal responsibilities. The session was conducted with professional courtesy, but the underlying message was clear. Such behavior would not be tolerated again. "Ma'am, we need to understand what drove you to take such drastic action," Sir Geoffrey said during the debriefing. "If there are aspects of your royal duties that are causing you distress, there are proper channels through which such concerns can be addressed." Camilla struggled to explain the suffocating feeling that had driven her to plan the escape. How could she make them understand the need for genuine freedom when their entire world was built on duty, protocol, and public service? How could she express the desire to be a normal person when normality was the very thing her position prevented? "I simply needed to experience what it would be like to make my own decisions for a few days," she said finally. "To walk somewhere without bodyguards, to eat at a restaurant without it being planned weeks in advance, to exist as myself rather than as a royal persona." The officials listened politely, but Camilla could see in their eyes that they viewed her explanation as naive and potentially dangerous. From their perspective, she had risked not only her own safety, but also the security protocols that protected the entire royal family. Over the following weeks, Camilla's daily routine was restructured with additional oversight and monitoring. Her movements were tracked more closely, her communications were reviewed, and her access to private transportation was severely limited. The palace justified these measures as enhanced security protocols rather than punishments, but the effect was the same. The media never learned the specific details of what had happened, but royal watchers began to notice subtle changes in Camilla's public appearances. She seemed more subdued during official events, and her spontaneous interactions with crowds became less frequent and more carefully managed. Captain Morrison faced his own consequences for his role in the incident. His pilot's license was suspended pending a full investigation, and his company lost several high-profile clients who were concerned about the publicity surrounding the unauthorized flight. Though he was eventually cleared of wrongdoing, his reputation in the private aviation industry was permanently damaged. The two RAF pilots who had intercepted the flight received official commendations for their professional handling of a sensitive situation. Squadron leader Phillips was promoted 6 months later, partly in recognition of his discretion and skill during the incident. For Camilla, the failed escape attempt marked the end of any illusions she might have had about achieving genuine independence while maintaining her royal position. The system that surrounded her was too powerful and too determined to allow her the freedom she craved. But in quiet moments, when she was alone in her private study, Camilla sometimes allowed herself to remember those brief hours when she had flown through the afternoon sky toward Switzerland, tasting freedom for the first and last time. The memory was bittersweet, tinged with regret for what might have been and acceptance of what could never be. The incident was eventually filed away in classified archives, another secret chapter in the complex history of royal life behind palace walls. The official records would remain sealed for decades, ensuring that the full truth of Camilla's attempted escape would never become public knowledge. Years later, when historians would eventually gain access to the classified files, they would find a story that illustrated the eternal tension between personal freedom and public duty that defines royal existence. Camilla's secret flight had lasted only a few hours, but it represented a moment when one person dared to challenge the golden cage that surrounded her life, even knowing that the attempt was doomed to fail from the very beginning.